Today I'll be doing Clemson. So first I'll go through their roster, and then I'll give you a predicted winner and loser for each of their games this season. So uh, Clemson's offense last year was a turnover machine, turning the ball over 22 times, and their offense averaged under 28 points per game, so they weren't that good offensively. And uh, Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence each won a national championship playing quarterback for Clemson. Watson won one in 2016, and then Lawrence in 2018. And it would be crazy to expect Clemson to continue to have the kinds of quarterbacks as those, because those quarterbacks were just really rare. But since then, they haven't even been good at quarterback. Those were their two best quarterbacks ever, Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence. But this year, they returned Cade Klubnik at quarterback, who is terrible. And he's really worse than his numbers showed last year, in my opinion. He had some times last year, like in the Duke game, where he just looked like one of the worst quarterbacks in college football. But of Clemson's 22 turnovers last year, Klubnik was 12 of them. He threw 9 interceptions and fumbled the ball 3 times. And I would have thought that with Dabo Sweeney and Garrett Riley's good coaching, that he would probably be a little bit better this year. But in the spring game, he didn't look any better. He still looked terrible. And I think that Dabo Sweeney should have brought in a transfer quarterback, even if it wasn't to be their starter, but to push Klubnik to try to play better than he did last year. Because the crazy thing about this is Cade Klubnik was a five-star quarterback and one of the top quarterback recruits of 2022. Uh, and so he'll be a junior this year. He started every game for them last season, and the year before that, in his freshman year, he did play quite a bit. But last season, he completed 63.9% of his passes, and he did get over 2,800 passing yards, 2,844. He played in 13 games, and he threw 19 touchdown passes. But his average yards per throw was really bad at only 6.3. And a lot of quarterbacks that aren't that good at throwing are good at running, but Klubnik's not even very good at running either. And he's not very good at throwing the deep ball, so he's just not really good at anything. Uh, and at running back, Clemson does lose their best running back, Will Shipley, and uh, that's not just a big loss in the run game. He was a big help to them at receiver and on special teams. He was a great return specialist. Now they do still have Phil Moff coming back at running back, who was Shipley's backup these past 2 seasons, and he is really good. He had nearly 1,000 yards rushing last season. He had 965 yards and averaged 5.4 yards per carry. And he had 13 rushing touchdowns on 179 carries last season. He doesn't quite have the speed of Shipley, but uh, mm, he is good at breaking tackles. He's a tough runner. But I don't expect Clemson to be as good at running back without Shipley in there too, because other than Moffa, they are questionable at the running back position. And then at wide receiver, so Clemson does have a decent group of wide receivers this year, but they just don't have those kinds of receivers that they had when they were winning championships and ACC championships and making the playoffs every year. That could give defensive coordinators nightmares. But they have Tyler Brown, uh, who showed last year as a freshman that he can be a good receiver. Uh, he had 52 catches for 531 yards and uh, 4 touchdowns and averaged 10.2 yards a catch last season. And then they have Antonio Williams, who got hurt last season and didn't play much, but as a freshman the year before, had a pretty good year at catching 56 passes. For 604 yards and uh, 4 touchdowns, averaging 10.8 yards per catch. And then they also have Troy Stellato, who last season showed some good signs at receiver, catching 39 passes for 337 yards and averaging 8.6 yards per catch. And he also had 1 touchdown catch. And then they do have a good tight end coming back, Breeding Stewell. He had 50 catches last season for 498 yards and 5 touchdowns, and he averaged about 10 yards per catch. And the offensive line. So Clemson's offensive line these past 3 seasons, that when the team has been down, it has been bad, and it used to be elite. They've really struggled to block, and the good news this year is they do have 7 offensive linemen coming back that all have starting experience, and they bring in to be their offensive line coach, someone that I'm familiar with. They bring in Matt Luke, who was the head coach at Ole Miss for 3 seasons. I'm an Ole Miss fan, and he was a terrible head coach, and I was glad to see him go. But he was on Georgia's coaching staff as the offensive line coach there in 2021 when they won the championship with one of the best offensive lines in the country. So I think he can help their offensive line. Uh, and Now on defense, I do think Clemson will still be good, but I don't really think they'll be quite as good as last year. They have stayed good on defense since Brent Venables has been gone, but they haven't been quite as good. They probably won't be quite as good this year because they lose so many players, and Dabo Sweeney won't use the portal to get quick help with that. But I would expect even the questionable parts of the defense to still turn out to be good this year with Dabo Sweeney's really good coaching. So the defensive line will be the strength of the defense this year, and that is really good that they've got a strong defensive line because it all starts up front. So they don't have any starters returning on the defensive line, but they've got 2 defensive linemen that are really talented and showed last year as backups how good they can be. Peter Woods and T.J. Parker. T.J. Parker last year had 33 tackles and 10 pressures and 5.5 sacks and a fumble recovery. And then Peter Woods, he didn't have any sacks, but he had 26 tackles and 10 pressures and a forced fumble. I expect those to be 2 of the best defensive linemen in the country this season. And They have 2 other defensive linemen that are both 4 stars that will probably be the other 2 starters on the defensive line that played some last year. They didn't make that many tackles. They've got Demonte Kate Hart, who had only 15 tackles last year, but did have 2 sacks and 9 pressures and a forced fumble. And then they've got Cade Denoff, who only had 12 tackles last year, but did have 7 pressures, playing as a backup. And then at linebacker, they do lose their top linebacker, Trotter. He's now in the NFL, but they do have Barrett Carter coming back, who is also a really good linebacker. He has in 25 games, 135 tackles, 9 sacks, and 13 pass breakups, and 3 interceptions, and 2 forced fumbles, and a fumble recovery. He'll probably be highly drafted next season. He could have went pro this year. But other than him at linebacker, they are questionable. Uh, and then in the secondary, they do lose 2 really good defensive backs. They lose Nate Wiggins at corner, and then Andrew Makuba at safety transferred out. And they do have R.J. Mickens coming back at safety, who in 24 games has 89 tackles, 3 interceptions, 5 pass breakups, and a fumble recovery. He'll be one of the best safeties this year in the country. He could have went pro this year, but other than him, they are questionable in the secondary. Uh, and on special teams, they retired their punter from last season, but kicker looks questionable to me. Uh, mm, but now moving on to the predictions. So starting with the Georgia game, Georgia's defense is going to be even better than Clemson's. Now, uh, I do think that Clemson's defense will be able to keep them in this game for most of it. It'll probably be close for like 3 quarters, but I don't expect Clemson's offense to be able to do hardly anything on Georgia's defense. I think uh, that Clemson will have a lot of 3 and outs in this game, and I think their defense will get tired in the fourth quarter, and uh, Georgia will be able to take advantage of Clemson's not so strong secondary with Carson Beck, and it ends up being a blowout. So in the opener last year, Clemson Mm. Lost to Duke by a score of 28-7. I expect them to lose to Georgia by a similar score. So then now they have Appalachian State, a pretty good team from the group of five level. And I think Clemson might be kind of slow at first in this game, coming off a blowout loss, but I do think they'll get it going later on and win by probably like 3 touchdowns. So now they take a week off before a big conference game against NC State, a team that beat them last year. And they do get this one at home, though. And with an extra week to prepare, I don't really think Clemson is going to lose to NC State again. Now, NC State is closer than they used to be to Clemson. But Clemson, I still think, does have a little more talent than NC State does. And then next, they play Stanford. This, I think, will be a big blowout. Clemson will beat them no problem. Stanford's awful. And then now they have a big conference game against Florida State. So Florida State had a much better record, last year than Clemson did, but the game went into overtime. Florida State did win, but Clemson came so close to pulling the upset. And so that was at Death Valley. This year it'll be at Florida State. Now, I do think that this game will be really close again, maybe even in overtime again. But Florida State, they've got a little bit better defense, I think, than Clemson does. Now, they're not as good, I don't think, at wide receiver as Clemson, but I do also think that they've probably got the better offensive line and running back group than Clemson does. And if this was at Death Valley, I would pick Clemson, but I think Clemson loses a really close one on the road to Florida State. At this point, they'll be like they were around this time last season, a blowout loss in the opener and then a close loss to Florida State. But unlike last season, this season, Clemson will still have a chance to make the college football playoff with it being 12 teams. Mean, that one will be I think, close game because Wake Forest has played them pretty tough these last couple of seasons, but I think Clemson will be good enough to beat them by around a touchdown. Uh, and then now uh, Virginia will be an easy win. And now they will be playing Louisville. This is one of the better teams of the ACC that I just don't really see Clemson losing to. I know it sounds kind of strange, probably, but I really would be shocked if Louisville went into Death Valley and got a win here. I think Clemson wins it by about a touchdown. Now they will be playing Virginia Tech in a road game, and I think Virginia Tech will have a chance also to make the ACC championship uh, mm, at this point. And I think a upset against Clemson would really help their chances, and I think they get it. I think they beat Clemson in a really close game. I would pick Clemson if it was at Clemson or even if it was a neutral game, though. And then at this point, Clemson is likely out of the conference championship and the college football playoff because they'll have three losses overall and two conference losses. And uh, uh, at this point, they would need to win the conference, having three losses overall to make the 12-team playoff. At this point, I think Clemson will probably be about ready to quit. And they have another road game the next week on the road at Pittsburgh. And I think they'll have a slow start, and Pittsburgh will give them a scare. But I do think Pittsburgh, though, is just so bad that Clemson does pull off an ugly win against Pittsburgh. Uh, so then after that, they play Citadel, and that will be an easy win for them. It'll be like a probably 50-point win. And then now the rivalry game against South Carolina. South Carolina did go into Clemson the last time they played them there and pull an upset, but that was because Spencer Rattler had a huge game and he's gone now. And I don't think South Carolina is going to be able to do much in this game offensively. They're not going to be very good. So I think Clemson wins it by probably like 10 points. My final prediction for Clemson is 9-3 overall and 6-2 in the conference. Mm, that will be it with this video. And please subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon.